My name is Emile Vidal Carr, and I've been in the fashion industry for 20 years. I've had the experience of working as a freelancer for some amazing fashion houses, from Alexander McQueen to Kanye West to Roland Mouret to Victoria Beckham and Ralph and Russo, to name just a few. And I'll be telling you my experience of working with some of these amazing brands. So I worked for Alexander McQueen, I think it was between the years of 2011 to 2014, on and off as a freelancer. And that just means that they'd hire me for a day, a couple of weeks or a couple of months. I remember the first time I walked in, there's this grandiose kind of foyer, and Alexander McQueen head office is located up on Clerkenwell Road. I was fortunate enough, I've worked at Alexander McQueen head office and McQ, which is the diffusion line for the Alexander McQueen brand. So yeah, like with anything, there's similarities and differences in the way both of them work. I worked for McQueen just after he passed away. So I officially worked under Sarah Burton, not Alexander McQueen himself. So I couldn't really say there was a difference in terms of management style, but I really enjoyed working there. It was, I would say, the best brand that I worked for in terms of work ethic and just excitability in terms of how they executed things. The first kind of job I did was I worked under the menswear department. So you walk into this grandiose reception, then McQueen has this glass lift. I think there's about 4 floors. So the second floor, I think, is the menswear floor. And I was working with a gentleman called Patrick, who I'm sure he's still there. He kind of takes lead on the technical menswear side of McQueen, and he knows so much. I learned so much working with him. He's an incredible guy. I think he's from Mauritius, actually. And the first project I think I worked on was this jacket. It was a menswear jacket made up of about 100 different pieces. So the pattern cutters had worked painstakingly on each of these pattern pieces that us, the machinists, had to make. And there were so many variations of it. So it wasn't by any means a straightforward project that had to be done. And that just struck me in terms of like, these guys do things absolutely meticulously. If I remember correctly, it was a kind of grey, variations of grey and black, these different pattern pieces, and it was meant to replicate shards of glass, like a stained glass window. And I remember seeing it in Savile Row months down the line. And one of my terms at McQueen, I was working in the women's wear department, which I had the most fun with. And it was funny how that came about, because must have been 2013, and my wife and I were 6 weeks before our actual wedding day, and my wife turned to me and said, Emile, we're 50% down on our wedding budget. How are we going to pay off the rest? And funny enough, it was actually my half that needed to be paid, and I just didn't know what to say to her. Now, the next day, I got a call from my agent who said that Alexander McQueen needed a machinist. Am I free to go down? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah. So that one day of work, at the end of the day, I went to Judy, the workroom manager for women's wear. I said to her, Judy, like, is there any more work coming up? I didn't give her the whole spiel that I was getting married. But she said, yeah, there's a few more days we can give you. And that few more days turned into a couple of weeks, and then that turned into 6 weeks of working back to back for Alexander McQueen. And it wasn't just regular 8 hours. When McQueen call you, you don't organise anything in the evening, because I would start there at around 9 o'clock, and then I wouldn't leave any earlier than 1 o'clock that day. So they'd pretty much cab you. Well, they would cab you home when you're working that late for them. And if you work for McQueen, if you work after 7 o'clock, they buy the whole building dinner. So the building's got 4 floors. I'd say there's at least 75 staff in the building. At around 7, 8 o'clock, everyone comes downstairs to the basement, which is the archive, where they hold all of the old McQueen designs. And that's where we'd all have like a communal dinner, and no expenses were spared. They'd buy Thai, they'd buy Indian, they'd buy Chinese. And then you have about half an hour to an hour to eat, and then everyone goes back to work, because you know that you've got another 6 hours of work ahead of you. So it really encouraged great camaraderie. Just going back a sec, there was one time when I worked in the menswear department when I'd been hired for just a day, because they wanted me to work on a collar for, I think it was a shirt. And all I did for that day was a collar. And when they're paying sample machinists, it's not cheap. But it really showed me how these guys really want to execute the design to perfection. There's no compromise. It has to be the way they visualize it. Otherwise, it doesn't get included. So I respected that work ethic very much. So as the weeks were running down with me working at McQueen, I was actually meant to make my tux for my wedding. And I always wanted to get married in a blue tuxedo, a midnight blue tuxedo. And there were very few companies that were selling one. And being in the fashion industry, you're very kind of finicky about the kind of look that you want, because velvet can look cheap. And I went to a few companies that were hiring, and I just couldn't see the one that I wanted. And through talking to the machinists and the other staff members, it transpired that working at McQueen, I was able to get a 50% discount. I used that to get my wedding tux. So I went down to the Savile Row, Alexander McQueen. I knew McQueen had the perfect tux for me, and they had it in the right size, available to buy there and then. And what would have cost £1,000 cost me 500. And this is the tuxedo from McQueen that I got married in. So I've had it for 10 years now. And it's one of the best investments, next to buying my wife's engagement ring. This is one of the best investments I've ever made. The thing is, I was meant to actually go to Paris with McQueen, but due to the schedule of my wedding, they realised that they didn't need me anymore. And it was perfect because it allowed them to have a few days of rest, working there. And by that point, it covered my half of the wedding, which was about £7,000. So I got paid really well working there. But more importantly, I had a great time. I had a lot of fun working with the team. One funny story, actually. I was telling someone like years ago that I worked at McQueen, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we know Lee." And in my mind, I was thinking, "Who on earth is Lee?" I just said I worked at Alexander McQueen, and so I just kind of let it go over my head. And then I mentioned, they mentioned it again, this Lee person. So I just thought, let me just ask them who Lee is. And then they said, "Oh, Lee is Alexander McQueen," and I felt so embarrassed because I must have looked like a fraud. But anybody who worked under Alexander McQueen would have heard people call him Lee. Like Lee was, I guess, a pet name that friends called him. But because I never worked at Alexander McQueen whilst he was alive, I could be forgiven for not knowing that. So that was a funny and embarrassing story. So I wouldn't say there were any worse parts of working at McQueen, really, because it is one of those places that you really need to have a strong work ethic about you. Because, like I said, the hours I was doing, so average 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, that's, 12 hours. So we're talking 16-hour days working at McQueen, working on high-level intricate garments. You've got beading that's coming from India, that's beaded on chiffon. So you're having to French seam those evenly. There weren't any bad or worse times. Like I said, it was the best brand that I've worked for. And I learnt so much from some of the machinists who had extensive years of experience. and I implement many of the things I learned at McQueen in my own business.